This is a good question because one of the easiest areas to disqualify a child um, under IDEA is going to be the speech language impairment part. Okay, now why is that? Well, I mean for obvious reasons, guys. Children that have articulation areas with intervention and also maturation, it doesn't take that much to move them along to a point where a school system, either legitimately or not legitimately, can say that their intelligibility is at a point to where they no longer need those services, and it no longer negatively impacts them in the education setting. So when there's more there, that's one of those areas where I've always had an issue when children are identified as a speech language impairment only type of student, when they have other diagnostic pieces or other concerns and other deficits that are not being considered or addressed by the IEP team. Okay. One of the major reasons these other areas, these other educational performance areas, aren't necessarily considered by the IEP team is because a speech language pathologist, in the majority of cases across the country, is going to be the child's case manager, because the speech language deficits and goals would be considered the child's specialized instruction. So instead of speech language being a related service like it is for the majority of IDEA eligible children with a speech language impairment, that is no longer a related service. It is their special education service. So therefore the team, because the speech language pathologist is the case manager, they don't tend to look at the child holistically, and then they fail to serve the other educational performance deficit areas. Okay, so that was my segue into this. So your son 7 has an IEP for speech, which is articulation. You're in Texas, requested an evaluation for dysgraphia, ADHD. He is already diagnosed. They reevaluated his speech. During this evaluation, they found his ADHD is not affecting his schooling. Now, how they end up determining that is through teacher rating scales, adaptive and behavior rating scales. Now, you can fill out those rating scales as a parent, and yours can be considered, but you also need the rating scales from teachers that are going to agree that the ADHD is impacting him. This is a very subjective thing, okay? Also, human memory is not that good. And then you also have the other factor that some of the teachers misinterpret the purpose of the adaptive and behavior rating scales and somehow internalize these things, that somehow if they answer that the child has issues, then it somehow reflects upon them as teachers for not being able to manage their class or not being able to properly instruct a child, which is absolutely wrong. That's why some of this stuff, it's our imperfect system of how we find children eligible in certain categories. But like I said, it's an imperfect system. And depending on what grade level, you also have this huge disparity of fairness and unfairness in these rating scales, because at elementary school levels, most of the time, the children have one, maybe two teachers for the entirety of their school day, which means that that teacher has that student for a long time, and over a short period of time gets to know that student. Okay, so therefore their adaptive or behavior rating scales that the teachers fill out could be far more accurate than, let's say, a student who was not identified at a young age, but let's say middle school or high school, starting to be issues. Well, now all of a sudden the child has 5 teachers, and high school even more, and they're on rotating schedules, and they see teachers maybe an hour 2 or 3 times a week. And yet these teachers are supposed to fill out accurately these rating scales that, once again, are very subjective, that aren't necessarily going to be reliable because they just don't see the kid enough. And then the interaction in those higher grades, especially self-directed work, also impact these considerations. Now, you're not in this situation because your child's 7, is 8 already. But I wanted to sit there and tell you this is probably why they didn't find anything. The other thing is, if you medicate your child for ADHD, that is absolutely going to have an impact. Now, I understand that the law technically says that they're supposed to look at your child in their natural state. Well, what is their natural state? Not medicated, right? But if they've never seen your child not medicated, then they don't know what your child's natural state is. And I will tell you that if your child's medicated at school, then it's really going to impact how they view your child with regards to the ADHD component. All right, so your child's currently qualified under speech could be considered, and probably should be considered, other health impaired, maybe with the dysgraphia. It sounds like to me that there's also some hidden issues that you are right to sit there and ask them to evaluate on. But dysgraphia isn't necessarily where I would go. I would focus more on the actual core subjects like reading, math, those kind of things, through the pathways allowed in Texas with regards to eligibility consideration for a specific learning disability. And then, like I said, the OHI, which would be other health impaired for the ADHD. Now you sit there and you go, okay, well, what do I do for the ADHD? Well, some of my clients, and I'm just telling you what some of my clients have done. Some of my clients have consulted with their doctor and faded out the medication for a while or a short term, leading up to school, usually weaning off during the summer so that the school employees could see the child in their natural state, which is unmedicated. That's a choice that some parents have made. None of my business what the parents do. My job as an attorney is to let you know that these are the pros and these are the cons. I cannot make the teachers see the child in their natural state if they've never seen the child in their natural state. And then I don't know of any kind of federal judge or hearing officer or administrative law judge that is going to call into question a teacher's viewpoint, though it's subjective. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's subjective. So how do you overrule an individual's perspective? So that's where you've got to change the perspective. Well, how do you change your perspective? You've got to change the environment in which the child is currently existing, so that they see what it is that you are saying is their natural state. Okay. So he gets picked on by older kids, school provided after school program. They ended up keeping speech because of the emotional factor. So if they're acknowledging, and this is my other thing, what paperwork do you have that they've been sending home? Okay, because the paperwork that they've been sending home, let's say any kind of in-class notes that are written that day by the teacher that are coming home, or other paperwork being sent home that would indicate behavior concerns, distractibility, inattention, meltdowns, those kind of things, they actually do a good job of trumping rating scales. Why is that? Well, like I said, human memory is unreliable. So things that are done that day at that moment are more accurate snapshots of how the child is really functioning, as opposed to handing a teacher a behavior rating scale for them to fill out after knowing the child for 9 weeks and having them have to search back in their memory, their imperfect memory, to try to determine whether the child engages in these kinds of behaviors. So if you do have documentation to support these reports coming home, you need to keep every one of them. Now, if you have to sit there and return this stuff every day, make a copy. If you don't have a mechanism to make a copy, take a camera phone picture of it. Now you sit there and you say, well, but I can get it from them later. Don't be so sure, okay? If they control your child's education record, I can tell you with certainty, 100% of the time, 100% of the time of the hearings that I have been involved in personally, I have caught the school 100% of the time manipulating, destroying documents, creating documents, falsifying documents. So don't sit there and assume that they're going to be good stewards of your child's education records. That's why anytime you can, you need to maintain your own files with the stuff being sent home. You need to make your own copies of whatever you send back. And you need to make sure that you maintain copies of things that they send you that you were supposed to return. Okay? These things safeguard you in case you ever need them. Yes, you can use the fact that they did not meet the goals, but I can sort of promise you that if they wanted to disqualify him, they'll say he met his goals. And then you sit there and have to challenge it. So you're going to have to let me know what the current status is, because right after you answer this question, the shutdown occurred. And I'm curious as to what your current state of affairs is, and see what we could do to help you through that process. Okay. The one thing I do want to add, though, guys, is that there's two components to speech and language. All right. Speech, which is articulation, for example, is not the same as language services. And one of the questions that I'm going to have with regards to your ADHD child is that there may be language issues, social communication issues, which would be pragmatics, that you want to also rule out as a deficit area. And so even though your child may not qualify under speech, which is the articulation piece, your child may continue to qualify under language, okay? And the language piece can sit there and carry over into ADHD, autism, specific learning disability, because those disabilities, many of those things are so rooted in the human brain's ability to understand what's being said to them, and then their ability to fully explain or express what they're thinking, okay? And in some of these, there's a direct correlation with regards to deficits in educational performance areas like academics, communication, obviously, and then social emotional development. And these are the three areas for which we primarily serve a child with an IEP, okay? We don't ignore the other two and just focus on academics. We don't do that. But you've got to sit there and find the mechanisms to keep your child eligible in order to receive those services.